كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah. So, in this section, Ibn Abidin, he covers the discussion of urf, custom. So, he'll go through explaining whether custom is acceptable in judging rulings of Shari'a, in giving rulings, in changing rulings. Can it be a base or basis for rulings? He'll discuss all of this, inshallah. The remit of urf, the custom. What is the remit of custom? Then, if the custom changes, then will the ruling change or not? He'll give a load of examples for this. Inshallah, we'll go through some examples. There's too many examples that he gives. We don't have time to go through every single one of them, but we'll go through, I think, a few examples. We'll give the picture to everybody. We'll go through the main ones at least that will give a certain impression, and people will understand from that what this is all about, inshallah. And then he will go through explaining when we do talk about the custom changing, the custom changing ruling, does that mean that we're overturning the ruling of Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayh? Now, how do we even do that? Is that something we're allowed to do? Likewise, if the scholars, they change the ruling based on a certain custom, then if the custom now changes today, do we also overturn them and change the ruling? And if so, who can do that? Can anyone do that? So he'll go through certain conditions, and we will go through those conditions, when it will apply and who it applies to, who is allowed to do this. Then he will also explain certain customs that are not acceptable. So what kind of customs are not acceptable? And we will go through that too. And what determines a custom? He'll explain all of this as well. What is it that will allow a custom to become something that is acceptable, or something which is not acceptable when it comes to rulings and basing rulings on these customs. So all about custom and urf today, inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So now we move on to the next part of Ibn Abidin's poem, where he discusses a very lengthy, detailed topic. وَالْعُرْفُ فِي الشَّرْءِ لَهُ اعْتِبَارُ لِذَا عَلَيْهِ الْحُكْمُ قَدْ يُدَارُ. And urf in Shari'a, it has a consideration. That is why rulings are based upon it. So then firstly, he discusses what is urf, what is aada. Urf and aada are used synonymously, so it's no problem. They both mean custom, practice, habitual practice of certain people. So he goes through definitions at the beginning. In the Ashbah wa Nadha'ir, he says there is a qaida. It mentions as-sadisatu al-'adatu muhakkamatun. So that's a famous ruling in amongst the usul of fiqh as well, that the 'ada, meaning custom, is something which will be ruled on. So this 'ada, this custom, this urf, this is something that is considered when it comes to rulings. So he says that urf and 'ada is considered in many rulings, such that the fuqaha made it the actual basis of many rulings. And they even mentioned that sometimes the actual reality of a certain word or anything, sometimes the reality will actually be left because of the indication of the usage and custom of something. So a simple example of it would be like if a person took an oath that, Wallahi, I will not eat meat. So generally in our custom, that would be red meat. If they eat chicken, though chicken is literally hakikatan meat, they would not have broke their oath, right? So that's what he's trying to explain here, that the hakikat will be left because of the usage and custom of something. He gives certain examples. I've given you a practical example of nowadays, is modernized the example for it. He gives a famous statement that's mentioned in the Sharh al-Biri from Mabsut. He says, "Athabitu bil-urf kathabit bin-nas." I explained this one because a lot of people get this mixed up. So he says that which is established through custom is established through nas. Just simply means clarification, meaning the nas of the mutakallim, meaning if you establish something through the actual speaker's clarification, right, that is something clear. That's how custom will also establish it. It's like the example I gave. If the person actually said red meat instead of just saying meat, then it would have been red meat, right? And chicken would not have made the person break their oath. So because custom establishes that ruling. So that's the kind of thing he's talking about here. Then he says that, which is the most important part of, once we understand urf, right? We say that the rulings change due to urf changing. So he says that there were many rulings that the mujtahid, the Sahib al-Madhab Imam Abu Hanif rahmatullahi alayh, himself, based on the urf, the custom of his time, and what the prevalent practice of their time was, the ruling was based on that. But now that the practice changes, the custom changes, the later scholars then gave a fatwa contrary to what Imam Sahib or Imam Abu Hanifa had mentioned, and that's simply because of the custom changing. One example he mentions, like we've already done previously, like the hiring of for teaching Quran. So hiring somebody, paying somebody for teaching Quran. We talked about that, and the later scholars, they gave fatwa on this because the time changed. The people, the way that it works in amongst this time is changed. Where people were previously given a stipend from the Baytul Mal, and no longer this exists. So anyway, and also the we've done another one, that we don't go in accordance to the apparent uprightness of the witnesses. So in Imam Sahib's time, which was the khairul quruni qarni thumma alladhina yalunahum thumma alladhina yalunahum. So Imam Sahib came in that last time of the Tabi'un, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam bore witness. He testified to that time being khairul qurun, as we call it, the best of times. So in those times, in that time, there was prevalence of, there was still, you can say, prevalence of people being upright. So the Qadi, if I was the Qadi, the witnesses came into my court, I could go based on the apparent default state of the people, in essence, that most people are in our time upright. So as long as he is not proven to be, the witness is not proven to be a open sinner, a fasiq, I will go with the default that, yeah, by default he is already upright, unless I have reason to believe otherwise. So I will take his testimony. But in the time of Sahibain, they saw that now the times have changed. Prevalence amongst people is not to be upright, and fisq is now fasiq. The fasiq are more prevalent in society. So now the job of the qadi is to actually establish them to be upright, because by default they're going to be fasiq now. So this is a ruling that, according to Sahibain, that changed. So they ruled on that, but that was again due to the time changing. So the urf changes, custom changes, time changes. This all changes the ruling now, you see. So it has massive impact. So Ibn Abidin gives a list of some 24, 25 different rulings here. He mentions everything in a lot of detail. We don't have time to go in every single mas'ala detail. I will mention a few and you will get the gist of it. The point of all of them is the same, that the ruling changed because of the time changing, the urf changing, the custom changing. So we'll just go in order. he says that he gives an example where coercion, he says, can only establish, Imam Saab's ruling is, can only establish by the king. So only the king, the ruler of the time, can coerce somebody. So if there was a ruling where, you know, a person was coerced to do something, and we ruled that, okay, this person was actually coerced, and we'll give a ruling based on coercion, right? That will only happen, that force will only be taken into consideration, coercion, if it was from the king, the ruler himself. If some other person came along, your neighbor or somebody else came along and forced you, compelled you, coerced you to do something, that coercion will not be considered, according to Imam Saab. Why? Because in his time, generally, people did not do that. It wasn't a normal thing for people to do. Coercion didn't occur like that because they would generally be scared of the Sultan, that if I coerce somebody, this person is going to go to the Sultan and is going to get me in trouble. So I better not do anything like that. So people were scared and respected the Sultan as such. They respected the king. They wouldn't ever do something like this. So this was the custom in Imam Saab's time. However, as time changed in the time of Sahibain, Imam Muhammad as well as Imam Yusuf, they ruled that no, coercion can occur now from people, the normal people as well, besides the king, the ruler, because people weren't fearful of the king and the ruler anymore. They were coercing people, they were forcing people to do things, and they had to now take that into consideration. So now the ruling changed because of the time changing. Another example he gives is where, if originally, according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayh, if a person, let's say the king gave somebody a certain penalty, punishment, maybe even to the extent of, because of treason, the king beheaded somebody, example, right? Now, if somebody mischievously spread the rumor and misinformed the king, because of that information, the king quickly put the punishment on the person and had the person lashed or fined or even beheaded or something, right? Now, if it later then turns out to be that this informant was actually mischievous and it was false what they were saying, then according to Imam Hanifa's actual ruling, then this person will not be held accountable, because the rule is he was just a sabab in it. He wasn't the actual reason for which it took place. He was just the means that the Sultan, what should have done is found out. He should have actually done some investigation, but he just went and... So the Sultan is in essence, therefore the Baytul Mal will then compensate for whatever the compensation should have been. So not the person who misinformed here. So this was in the time of Imam Saab. But as in the time of Sahibain, they saw that this problem is growing, where people are going to the king or the ruler and they're going and complaining of somebody who they don't like and making some story up so that they get into trouble. And later it proves that this person was false. They gave wrong information, but they are let off the hook because of this ruling. So they started issuing the fatwa that no, this person, we call the sa'i, the informant, will be held liable. There will be dhaman, there will be liability on this person. And this was because of the time changing, they gave this ruling. So there's many other examples like this, that if a person, and the next one, just to do one more, he says that if a person was a ajir mushtarak, meaning a person was a worker, that was hired on some work, like a tailor. So you are hiring the service of the tailor. He's mushtarak because he's doing work for other people at the same time as well. He's not just your worker. So he is working for others. You went to the tailor, you told him, can you take this cloth of mine and sew me a garment? Now, you went back to that tailor after some time and the tailor says, sorry, your cloth got stolen or whatever, something like this. Then what happens? Generally speaking, the the original ruling according to Imam Sahib would have been that because the tailor, they had this cloth of yours as an amana, and in amana, in trusts, there is no liability. So that means this you'd have to take his word for it, and there's no liability. But when they start seeing that this ajir mushtarak, in essence, are just claiming these things just like that, without any proof, because they know they don't have to prove it, it's amanat, so they just get away with it like this. So then Sahibain gave the ruling that he will be liable for that cloth. So then that then prevented the people from making these kind of claims. So now we'll give a few more examples just so that people can understand. There are one or two examples that take a bit longer to explain, so I will skip some of them. But just to do a few more examples. So the original position, the next example he gives, was that the guardian, if there's a guardian of an orphan, was allowed to use the money of the yatim, of the orphan, as mudaraba, to increase the money to invest the money, in essence, of the yatim. So he was allowed to do that before. So the guardian who was instructed to look after the orphan by the wali, in essence, by the person who's actual guardian, after their death, they said that you look after my child, for example, right? So then this person was allowed to originally, but then they gave the fatwa. They saw that these people are, they're just taking the wealth, they're taking the profits, they're, using that money for other reasons, and using these kind of loopholes that they're doing business, and then they're losing the money of the orphan, and they're making them lose out money. And in essence, they're, somehow, taking that money on the side. So when they start seeing corruption, they started changing the ruling. They said that this person is not allowed to do this anymore. They're not allowed to touch the money of that yatim like this in order to invest it. Then another example he gives is where there is liability. Originally, according to Imam Saab's position, the person who usurps the real estate of the orphan or of the endowment, so they usurp that real estate, and later they claim that when it's given back, in essence, they claim that this property has been damaged by natural disaster, some wind or whatever came, natural disaster, and it's damaged this property. So original position is that the usurper is not going to be liable because it's natural disaster that destroyed the property, for example. But then they gave fatwa that the later scholars, that the person will be held accountable. The usurper will be held accountable even if he claims that this natural disaster had destroyed the wealth of the orphan and the endowment, in order to look after the wealth of the orphan and endowment, because if the person knows that I'll be held accountable regardless, they will not violate in taking and usurping their wealth. So this was to protect them. Another example he gives is that the original position of the madhab was when you give out the land, for example, or the building, the property of a orphan or the endowment, you're allowed to give it on whatever, however long lease you wanted to give it for. But then the fuqaha, they saw a corruption here, that people were giving long leases on the wealth of, for example, the endowment. You got a 50-year, 100-year lease, for example, right? And in them days, the documentation wasn't, like it is now, official documentations and things. So anyway, what they saw was that people were just taking this land, and then they were keeping it, passing it down generation to generation. So then people would then later, if anyone came along to claim a stake to this property or anything, they would say, or the land, they would say that this is our land. What are you talking about? We've been living here. Our fathers lived here. Our grandfather lived here. We've been living here forever, and this is our our home for our family. This is not anybody else's. This is not waqf, or this is not an endowment. This is not belonging to this orphan. Don't know what you're talking about. And obviously the people around would have said that, yeah, this, because then the generations later, they would have seen them living there for so many years, and nobody would have understood it to be, so the wealth would have been lost of the waqf and of the yatim. So then the fuqaha, they saw this corruption taking place, that people are just taking claim to, especially the endowment, the land of the endowment of which was endowed, or the property that was endowed. They're just taking a claim to it of ownership. So then they said that in any building or anything that is rented, it can maximum be given only for 1 year. Every year, the lease will have to be renewed. And the benefit of that would have been that because they're renewing it every year, they would have known that it's not ours and it's belonging to somebody else. And in land, they said the maximum you can give the land on lease for, on rent for, is 3 years. So because 3 years here, because some crop, because generally land would have been farmed on, and some crop will obviously, when you grow it, when you prepare the land, it will not grow and harvest every year. It will take longer. So we need to give a longer time. So 3 years, so the farmer can take benefit from that land by growing crop on it, or whatever they're going to grow onto it. So this is what the later scholars did. They changed the rule. You see, the rule changed because of the urf, the time changing, the people's custom changing, the way that people behaved, that changed. So these are examples. He gives so many more examples. And like I said, the purpose of all of these examples is simply to show us that when the time changes, then the ruling will also change. Now, there is an interesting ruling here which I want to give, because in one of the examples he gives, because it'll give us some benefit to further our understanding here. So he says that we don't believe the wife after the consummation of marriage has already taken place. So she accepts that the consummation of marriage has taken place. She accepts that. But she also makes a claim that she hasn't taken possession of the mahar, the dowry, which was meant to be immediately paid. So she's saying that the dowry that was meant to be immediately paid, I still haven't got that yet. That's the claim she's making. So here, he's saying that the original position of the madhab was that we would have listened to her. We would have said, okay, you haven't taken possession of the mahar. You are the defendant in this particular case. And the husband, if he claims otherwise, he's going to have to prove that he has paid her, right? That immediate payment. But if he can't prove it, then we just go and stick to her, and we say that, okay, she's saying that she hasn't taken, so give her. That's what we would have ruled originally. But because the time in the fuqaha's time changed, and how did it change? That a woman wouldn't allow the husband to consummate the marriage unless the mahar, the immediate payment of the mahar, was given. That was the normal custom in their time, that everyone would have given the mahar, the immediate payment at least, and the rest of it would have been deferred payment. But the agreed upon amount, that was immediate payment, if not all of it, that much would have definitely been given before the consummation. So if she accepts that now in their time, the fuqaha's time, that consummation has happened, but I haven't got the mahar, then she is doing the claim now, because she is claiming against the norm of their time. So then they changed the ruling, and they said, no, the husband here is the defendant, because he is claiming the norm that he did give the mahar, which was meant to be immediately paid. And they gave fatwa on this opinion because the urf changed. You see, the custom changed. So this is a ruling that they, fuqaha, then gave. However, in our time now, we will change the ruling back to the original position, because in our time, there's no such thing that the woman, the wife, she won't allow the husband to consummate marriage because she hasn't got the immediate payment. That is not the custom. If that is the custom in some places, then that will be the fatwa. But in our general Western custom, that is not the case, where the dowry has to be paid before the consummation. So that's why we go back to the original position. This gives us something interesting, which we'll discuss. So that's another example he gives. That is something to remember here. In fact, I think these examples, are sufficient, because if we carry on doing all the examples, we will take a long time. But these are examples he is giving to make us understand this now, yeah? Then he mentions that he's going to mention something which we'll talk about at the end. But so far, we've understood that the ruling changes because of the time changing here. So that's the purpose, that's the reason, because if the question always arises that how did these later scholars rule against the original position of the madhab or rule against Imam Sahib? It's because they understood that Imam Sahib based this ruling on his urf, on his custom. And had Imam Sahib been alive today and seen the custom of people today, then he would have ruled like us, because we are basing the ruling on Imam Sahib's principles, on his qawaid, on his usul. We're not going against him. We are ruling in exactly the way he would have ruled if he was alive today. So that's the reason the fuqaha felt that they are able to even rule in this particular case. Otherwise, who has the audacity to overturn a ruling that Imam Abu Hanifa, the Imam of our madhab, gave? So this is something he concludes on that particular part. Now, just to mention, he mentions a very pertinent question which we talked about, that does this mean now that every time a urf changes, the ruling will then change? Are we going to carry on changing rulings like this? Are we allowed to do that? So he poses this question, and he simply answers it that yes, very simply yes. And we saw an example of that. I just gave you an example of that as well, where if a ruling is based on custom, when the custom changes, then obviously the ruling will change. So that's something very important to understand in this particular matter. Now, when we talk about the changing of ruling, it doesn't mean anyone can do that, right? So anyone can stand up and say, oh, the urf has changed, so therefore we'll change the ruling. No, it's going to be for those people who have the ability to look into the ability to decide firstly which urf is to be taken into consideration. Likewise, they have a firm grounding and understanding regarding the madhab, how the principles are, what the qawaid, what the rules are, all the different things, and then they take everything into consideration, and then they're ruling. So a person has to be somebody who has, the ability to be able to do this. Then he mentions 3 conditions when these scholars will even do this. So firstly, these scholars, they have to know the qawaid of Shari'a, all of the rulings, and they can differentiate between the urf, which it's permissible to base rulings on, and the urf which is not permissible to base rulings on, because there will be urf which is not permissible to base ruling on. So there has to be a level of ijtihad that the person has. Originally, they said that it has to be a mujtahid mutlaq who can only do this. But later, scholars, they saw that these kind of people are not around anymore. So then they allowed people of any other ijtihad, the mujtahid fil madhab as well, to be able to do a person who's reached that stage. And later scholars even allow a group of scholars to come together and decide whether that is the case. So that's the first thing that he mentions. Then he says, the second thing is that a person has to know the urf of their time and the state of the people. You have to know that. Obviously, if you're just assuming and guessing that the urf has changed, then you have to actually know that the urf is like this. So you have to have proof for that and know the urf of the people. And then he even mentions about Imam Muhammad. He was very well versed regarding this. He would go out to the whenever the ruling came up of, for example, in their time there would be a person who dye cloth, and there was a mas'ala that that was confusing. So then he went to the people that dye cloth and actually asked them what their custom actually is. So then he would find out in this way. So like this, you would find out the custom of the people. You would sometimes go out your way to do the research to find out the custom. So this is the kind of person we're looking at. That's the second condition he mentions. And the third condition he mentions is that this person must have studied under a expert teacher who would have been able to train them in this way. You can't have just done reading of a few books and then think that you're able to do this. So that's another condition he actually mentions. And he mentions this from the Munyat al-Mufti and different quotes that he backs this all up from. So this is all that he is talking about over here. Then he mentions something very important as well, that it's not permissible for a mufti. A mufti shouldn't be, and even a qadi, he says, shouldn't be people who just rule based on the zahirul madhab, based on the textual evidences, and they leave the urf completely aside. The custom they don't take into consideration. No, a true good mufti is the one who understands the urf of the time and tries to give a ruling in accordance to it. But obviously, like I said, it's difficult for one person to do that on their own in terms of changing rulings. Then he quotes from a few other rulings to give this understanding. So just as an example, he says that if a person ate some flesh, some meat that was stuck between the teeth, then it mentions in Hidayah that the if it's a small amount, the fast won't break, and if it's a large amount, the fast will break. Okay, so then he gives that certain people they gave the ruling of kafara as well. And when did they give ruling of kafara is based on they saw that the people didn't find eating that which was stuck between the teeth repugnant. So there were some people like Imam Abu Yusuf, I believe it was, that he considered it to be not any kafara because in their time they saw that the thing that is stuck, the food that is stuck between the teeth, people will find eating that after having picked it repugnant. That's like gross. Like why would you eat that? So because they feel like this, that's why they ruled that, because that's not a complete violation, so there will be no kafara there. Though there will be qada, but no kafara, because there's no complete violation. And in order for kafara, there needs to be a complete violation. But others, when they saw that in their time that people find that to be, they don't find that repulsive and repugnant, they find that fine to eat. So then they rule for there to be kafara. Okay, and I believe this was Imam Zufr rahmatullahi alayhi also ruled according to that. So anyway, so you see there's that play here based on the urf changing. So they gave fatwa based on this. Now, he reiterates the point that it has to be not just an assumption that this is the custom, it has to actually be the truth. This is the actual custom of the people. And lastly, he explains that the urf, if it's contrary to Shari'a, then that urf is discarded. So urf is not considered if it's contrary to Shari'a. Like for example, if there's a widespread urf like there is in our times of dealing in interest, like that's very, very common, customary. So does it mean that we will change the ruling of Sharia because the custom changed now? No, because that goes clearly against the nas of Sharia. Here we're talking about when do we take and overturn a ruling? When the mujtahid based the ruling on urf of his time. And now that urf has changed. So basis of the ruling was the urf. So now because the urf changed, the ruling can then change. You cannot change rulings that are not based on urf, that are based on nas of Sharia. So that is something that is well explained, and a person needs to understand that. And then he also goes into explaining one more thing, that there will be obviously the same sort of theme here. That so, for example, there is a ruling that's mentioned in our fiqh books that if a person who owns some land, they decide to grow a certain crop on it, whereas that land was capable of growing a better crop, which would have necessitated more, more zakat, you can say, from that coming from it. Okay, that's going to be the ushar and kharaj. But for those people who don't understand that, that's fine. It's like the taxes that are taken for the crop that is grown. So there's a certain amount that is taken. So now, if the person grows a higher level of crop, like for example grapes, because they've got a vineyard, that is taxed at a higher rate in comparison to those crops which just grow, which take a lot more effort to grow. So those crops will take a lot more effort to grow. They're going to be taxed less, and those crops we just grow on their own. You just put the seed, and it's very easy. Just irrigate, and it'll grow on its own. Because there's less work required, there's higher taxes, because it will encourage people to make the effort. If they want to pay less taxes, make the effort and grow this crop. So it obviously encourages growth and economy of that particular country. So it's a very clever way of allowing the country to become self-sufficient rather than importing constantly. So anyway, that's another matter. The point is that if the person grows the lower level of crop, despite that land having the ability to grow the higher level of crop, then the ruling was that they will still be taxed at the higher level. Even if they grew the lower one, they will still be taxed at a higher level, because they chose to do the lower one for no good reason, in essence, because they wanted to pay less taxes. Now, this is a ruling that the fuqaha, they say that we mention it, it's there, but we will not give fatwa on it. So now we will, in essence, there's an ishkal, there's a question that is posed on that, but isn't this hiding knowledge? That you're not giving the knowledge to the people. So they give answer to this, say, no, this is not hiding knowledge, because you have to understand when to and who to give that knowledge to. If you start giving fatwa based on this, then you will give the license to oppressive rulers to then say all lands over here, I believe, is capable of higher, then everyone will be taxed at a higher rate, and there will be nobody stopping, because he is using your fatwa that you gave. So you're not going to give out these kind of rulings which will allow people to misuse and to then oppress the people. So this is something to take into consideration. There are other examples of this. That's the example he gives over here. And this explains something very nicely for us. And one more thing I wanted to cover. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. So alhamdulillah, today we went through the urf section. There is a bit left that inshallah we will just discuss next time. But this particular section of the urf that we have done, where Ibn Abidin first mentions that urf is considered in basing rulings of Shari'a upon urf, meaning custom. He discussed what this urf and custom is, and then he went through various examples to explain how those rulings which were based on urf, once that urf changes, then the ruling can also change. So the ruling, the outcome will change when the urf is changed, because the urf is the thing that the ruling was based on. So he gave various examples. I will spend this time giving some new examples in the summary, so we can cover a few more inshallah. So because I've already given the other examples, you can listen to those recordings for those examples inshallah, if you want to summarize them and listen to them again. But he gives another example for that originally, if a husband was to make a claim that when he gave, for example, he said to his wife, you are divorced, and then he said istithna insha'Allah. So if he took an oath that he did do this, the original position was that he would have been believed, right? But because the fuqaha saw that people are becoming corrupt now, and they will just take an oath just like that, even falsely, they will take an oath. So then they said that we won't believe him even if he takes an oath. He is going to have to bring a proof that he actually said inshallah, or he told somebody from beforehand that I'm going to say this to my wife and I'm going to say inshallah. So he's got proof. So he's going to have proof now. So they ruled that the husband won't be listened to anymore because we don't consider people to be very truthful anymore and very honest. So that's a ruling, how it changed because of the urf changing. Likewise, if for example a person says kullu hillin alayya haram, everything halal is haram upon me. So now original position is that is on everything, on food and drink and everything, right? But in a certain custom, when they saw that people are saying this for in relation to the wife, everything halal is haram upon me, means that my wife is haram upon me, meaning talaq. So they ruled that this was divorce by default based on their custom. The mashayikh of Balkh, however, they said that this won't be divorce unless a person intended. So now the scholars responded saying that that's because in their lands, that's what their custom was, that it wasn't to intend the wife being haram, meaning a divorce. But obviously where this is the custom, that this is what the person means when he says this, then that is what it will take into consideration. So you can see he gives various examples like this, where he shows that the time changing will allow the ruling to then change. The custom changing, in essence, will allow the ruling to change. So he gave all of this to us, and he explained how the scholars, they went against Imam Sab here, apparently so, but they only did that because they knew that it's because Imam Sab's rulings are based on his custom. So if Imam Sab was alive today, he would have ruled like us, because we are basing the rulings on Imam Sab's principles, on his qawaid, on his usul. So it's not like they're going against Imam Sab. They're in essence ruling in accordance to Imam Sab's principles here. So obviously we went through that. Who will be allowed to do this? Only the person who understands all of these rulings and who knows custom, who knows the custom of his people actually, who knows how to, who understands how the qawa'id, the rulings of Shari'a properly, who understands which urf will be taken, which urf will not be taken, who understands a level of ijtihad they have. So that is the thing, and I explained there that this will apply to a group of scholars who have got to a certain level, that they will be then acceptable as well. And the last condition he mentioned was that this person has to have sought knowledge, has to have studied with a expert teacher who would have been able to train this person in this manner. So this is something he went through, and he went through an explanation here which was important as well, that a mufti, a qadi, shouldn't just simply rule in accordance to the books and just always give a ruling according to the Zahirul Madhab. They have to know the urf of their time, so that they're able to give a preponderance to this ruling, or sometimes give a ruling based on based on their urf. And lastly, he discussed that the urf which will not be taken into consideration is the urf which goes against the Shari'a. Like we explained, that if there was a prevalence, or there is a prevalence of dealing in interest in riba, that doesn't make it permissible now because of the urf. We're going to change the ruling there, because that would be going against the nas of Sharia. You can only go against those rulings which are based on urf. Then if the urf changed, those rulings can only be changed, not other rulings.